Every Saturday morning, the library in Cedar Creek filled with a gentle kind of magic. The children knew it as Story Hour, though for many of them it felt like something bigger, a doorway into lives they had never imagined before. And at the center of it all stood Malik Harper. Malik was in his early 30s, tall and soft-spoken, with a voice that carried the calm patience of someone who truly believed in words. His hands were always busy, either balancing a stack of brightly colored picture books or adjusting his glasses before beginning a story. He had a way of lowering himself to the children's level, sitting cross-legged on the carpet with them, letting them feel that the world of books belonged not to adults alone, but to everyone who dared to listen. On this particular Saturday, the children gathered on the faded rug decorated with moons and stars. They leaned against each other, whispering in anticipation, clutching small library cards like secret treasures. Malik smiled as he opened the book of the day, a story about Ruby Bridges, the little black girl who once walked into an all-white school, brave despite the crowd outside. His voice carried warmth, but also weight. The children listened, eyes wide, some gasping when Ruby was shouted at, others sighing with relief when she kept walking. Parents stood at the back, as they often did. Some smiled quietly, proud that their children were learning about courage. Others folded their arms, watching with guarded expressions. Malik had grown used to both kinds of looks. And then, at the far end of the room, stood a new face. A woman in a stiff navy suit, her lips pressed into a thin line, her gaze fixed not on the book, but on Malik himself. She held a tablet close to her chest, tapping notes with clipped precision. Malik noticed her immediately. She did not smile when the children laughed at Ruby's small triumphs. She did not soften when a little girl raised her hand to say, "She's just like me. I'm the only brown girl in my class, too." When the story ended, applause filled the room, the children clapping, some parents joining, others shifting uncomfortably. The woman didn't clap. She walked straight to the front desk, heels sharp against the tile floor, and introduced herself with the crisp efficiency of someone used to being heard. "My name is Karen Whitfield," she said, her voice firm. "I'm on the parent committee for the school district. We'll be reviewing the list of books you're using here. Some of these topics are not suitable for children." She didn't wait for a reply, only offered a tight smile that wasn't really a smile at all, and turned to leave. Malik nodded politely, though inside, his chest tightened. He had heard this tone before, the tone of certainty without curiosity, the tone of judgment disguised as concern. The children, oblivious, were still buzzing around him, tugging at his sleeves and asking what book would come next week. Malik answered them with his usual warmth, but as he watched Karen walk out the door, he felt the air in the library shift. Something had begun, and he knew it would not be simple. The news broke quietly, the way rumors often did in Cedar Creek. At first it was just a whisper among parents in the grocery store line, then a post on the neighborhood Facebook group, and finally, an official notice pinned to the bulletin board outside the courthouse. Karen Whitfield had filed a formal complaint against Story Hour. The language of the complaint was polished, legalistic, stripped of overt hostility. Yet the meaning was sharp as glass. Karen accused Malik of injecting political content into children's programming and fostering division under the guise of education. Her Exhibit A was a list of the books he had read aloud in recent months. A biography of Ruby Bridges, a story about Jackie Robinson, a picture book about families with two moms, a collection of folk tales from Africa. On paper, the complaint never mentioned race, not once. But Malik could see the outline clearly, like a shadow cast against the page. It was not the dragons or the castles she objected to. It was the fact that his stories showed children that heroes could be black, that families could look different, that courage sometimes meant walking into a room where you weren't wanted. Within a week, the online petition supporting Karen's position had gathered several dozen signatures. The comments beneath it were filled with familiar phrases. "This isn't about race, it's about innocence. We just want to protect our kids from unnecessary ideas. Children don't need to be burdened with guilt at such a young age." Malik read those words late at night, sitting at his kitchen table, the glow of his laptop painting his face in pale blue light. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, tempted to reply, but he didn't. He had been here before in different forms, in college debates, in whispered conversations in staff rooms. in the subtle pauses that came after someone asked where he was really from. The feeling returned, heavy and suffocating. That old ache of being discussed but never spoken to, dissected but never heard. They were talking about him as though he were an abstract idea, not a man who spent his mornings kneeling on a rug, helping children sound out words. He closed the laptop and pressed his palms together, breathing slowly. When he could think again, he picked up the phone and called his director, Mrs. Davis. She answered on the second ring, her voice tired but steady. "I saw the complaint," she said before he could speak. "We'll file our response. We'll stand by you, Malik, but—" She hesitated, and in that pause, Malik felt the weight of everything she wasn't saying. "Be ready. This may go to a hearing, and I want you to take care of yourself in the meantime." Malik promised he would. He hung up, stared at the ceiling, and wondered how something as simple as reading to children could turn into a battlefield. The next morning, he returned to the library, stacked his books neatly on the counter, and forced himself to smile as the children ran toward him. But in the corner of the room, silence pressed against him like a storm on the horizon. He knew now. Story Hour was no longer just about stories. The library felt different now. The rug with moons and stars was still there, the shelves still hummed with color, but the air carried a quiet unease. A few parents who had once been regulars stopped coming. Their absence was not loud, not announced, just empty spaces where familiar faces used to sit. Malik noticed. Children noticed too, though none of them had words for it. One Saturday morning, a father lingered after Story Hour. He was tall, broad-shouldered, a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He shuffled his feet before speaking. "Nothing personal," he muttered, avoiding Malik's gaze. "It's just, there's too much noise around this whole thing. We don't want to get caught in the middle." He took his daughter by the hand and left. Malik stood for a long moment in the doorway, the man's words echoing in his head. Nothing personal. The phrase had followed him his whole life, in job interviews, in apartment searches, in friendships that never quite crossed into honesty. It was always meant as a shield, but to Malik it sounded like a knife carefully hidden behind polite cloth. But silence was not the only thing filling the space. Slowly, quietly, whispers of support began to gather around him. One afternoon, a teacher named Emily Ward stopped by the library. She taught second grade at the local elementary school and had brought a thick envelope with her. Inside were crayon drawings and shaky letters from her students. "Mr. Malik," one note said in looping pencil lines, "thank you for the book about Ruby Bridges. I want to be brave like her." Another had a picture of Malik, drawn with a giant smile and a crown of books on his head. Emily smiled as she handed them over. "I thought you should see what you're doing here," she said. Then, there was Mrs. Turner, a widow from Malik's neighborhood. She was too old to attend Story Hour herself, but she shuffled into the library one afternoon with a still warm apple pie. She placed it on the counter and slid across a folded note. Malik unfolded it later, finding only 5 words in delicate cursive. "Keep reading. We need you." Yet the resistance grew louder too. Flyers appeared around town for an informational meeting in the school gym, organized by Karen. The slogan on the front was simple, in bold letters, "Give childhood back to children." Beneath it, bullet points warned of divisive literature, sensitive topics, and inappropriate influences. Malik didn't attend, but friends told him what had been shown on the projector that night. His face, captured from library photos, projected 10 feet tall on the gym wall. Around it, covers of books he had read aloud. The Undefeated, Last Stop on Market Street, Julian is a Mermaid. His name spoken like a warning. The word used again and again was divisive. Malik sat in his living room when he heard this, the quiet of the night pressing in. He thought about how the word divisive always seemed to mean the same thing. You spoke when you were supposed to stay silent. You showed yourself when you were supposed to stay invisible. He stared at the books stacked on his coffee table, their covers bright against the dim lamplight. "Divisive?" he whispered to himself. The only division he could see was between those who believed children could handle the truth, and those who insisted they couldn't. The storm was no longer on the horizon. It was already gathering above Cedar Creek. The call for help came not from Malik, but from someone who had been listening all along. One evening, as the town buzzed with talk of hearings and complaints, a quiet post appeared on Cedar Creek's community board. It was written by Emily Ward, the second-grade teacher who had given Malik the envelope of children's letters. The message was short, lowercase, without slogans or exclamation marks. If Story Hour helped your child learn kindness, if it gave them courage or comfort, please come to the courthouse on Monday. Cedar Creek belongs to all of us. There was no photograph attached, no dramatic design, just words. And yet those words traveled. Parents copied them into text threads. Teachers shared them in their classrooms. Former students reposted them with memories of their own childhood library visits. By Sunday night, the post had been seen hundreds of times. By Monday morning, cars lined up outside the library, headlights winking in the dawn. Families spilled out, children clutching their library cards like talismans. Some held hand-painted signs. Let us read. Books belong to everyone. Malik stood at the entrance, watching as one family after another arrived. His heart swelled and tightened at once. These were ordinary people, or grocery clerks, bus drivers, teachers, nurses, yet together they seemed like something larger, like a river that had been quiet too long and was now surging forward. Among them was little Tommy, the boy who had once whispered that he wanted to hear the Jackie Robinson story again. He tugged at his mother's hand, his voice carrying over the crowd. I don't want Story Hour to go away. His mother knelt, smoothing his hair, then looked up at Malik with a determined nod. Malik walked down the steps to meet them, feeling the cold morning air on his face. For the first time in weeks, he saw his community not in fragments, not in the wary silence of those who had stepped back, not in the sharp edges of complaint, but as something whole. They were still almost all white, their skin pale against the winter chill, but they had chosen to stand beside him. The difference that once isolated him now seemed to bind them together, like threads of many colors woven into the same fabric. He raised his hand to greet them, and a hush fell across the group. He wasn't sure what to say. His throat felt tight, but the children saved him. Mr. Malik, one shouted, can you read us another story when this is over? Laughter rippled through the crowd, warm and genuine. Malik smiled, his eyes stinging. Yes, he said softly, his voice breaking into the cold morning air. Yes, I will. And for the first time since Karen Whitfield's complaint, he believed he might actually get the chance. The courthouse in Cedar Creek had never been this full. Normally, it held zoning disputes and the occasional traffic violation. But on this Monday morning, the benches overflowed with parents and children, teachers in their work clothes, even the owner of the local diner in his grease-stained apron. The marble walls echoed with the sound of whispered conversations and restless feet. At the front of the room sat Judge Harland Harlow, a man with silver hair and a reputation for brevity. He tapped his gavel once, the sharp sound slicing through the murmur. This is a hearing on the matter of the Cedar Creek Public Library and the programming known as Story Hour, he announced. Mrs. Whitfield, you may begin. Karen rose, dressed in the same navy suit Malik had seen weeks earlier. She carried a thick folder, as if sheer weight might substitute for truth. Her voice was smooth, rehearsed. Your Honor, this is not about banning books. This is about protecting children from material that is developmentally inappropriate. Mr. Harper has introduced themes that burden children with guilt, fear, and confusion. Our children deserve stories that unite, not divide. She placed several book covers on the table like evidence. The Undefeated, Last Stop on Market Street, Julian is a Mermaid. She gestured toward them as though they were contraband. We asked the court to suspend Story Hour until the library can guarantee neutral, non-political programming. There was a hum of agreement from a small corner of the room, but most of the faces looked uneasy, their eyes flicking between Karen and Malik. When his turn came, Malik didn't bring notes. He rose slowly, smoothing the front of his sweater, and stepped to the stand. I am not here to burden children, he began. His voice was calm but carried. I am here to remind them that courage kindness, and fairness belong to everyone. The books I read are about children like them, facing questions they already sense but can't yet name. They know what it means to be left out. They know what it means to feel different. These stories show them they are not alone and that being different is not a weakness, but a strength. He paused, meeting the judge's eyes, then the children's. I choose these books not to divide, but to help children understand why division hurts. Pretending differences don't exist doesn't protect them, it blinds them. And children deserve more than blindness. A hush settled. Then, from the back, a small hand shot up. Judge Harlow frowned. "This is irregular," he said, but something in the room shifted, the crowd leaning toward the interruption. It was Tommy's mother. She stood, her son tugging at her sleeve. The judge gave a curt nod. "My son," she said, her voice shaking, "used to tease a classmate. He thought it was harmless. Then we came to story hour. After hearing about Jackie Robinson, he told me, 'If heroes can make mistakes and change, then I can too.' Since then, he's treated that girl with kindness. If that isn't what childhood should be about, I don't know what is." The room erupted in low murmurs. A teacher dabbed at her eyes. Someone clapped once, then quickly stopped, embarrassed in the solemn space. Karen stiffened, lips pressed thin. Malik stood silent, his heart pounding, but in that moment, he knew something had shifted. The courtroom no longer felt like a battleground. It felt like a choice, and the people of Cedar Creek were beginning to make theirs. Judge Harlow called for a recess. The courtroom emptied into the hallway, voices colliding in a low, nervous roar. Reporters scribbled notes. Children sat cross-legged on the marble floor, their parents whispering over their heads. Malik stayed near the water fountain, his palms pressed against the cool surface, trying to still the thudding in his chest. That was when he saw her. Karen stood only a few feet away, clutching a paper cup of water with both hands. Her posture, usually stiff and certain, seemed to waver. She noticed Malik watching and, after a long pause, spoke, not in the commanding voice she used at the podium, but in something closer to a whisper. "Do you think I hate you?" she asked, eyes fixed on the ripples in her cup. The question caught him off guard. He searched her face, saw something fragile in it. Not remorse exactly, but fear. "I don't think you hate me," he said softly. "I think you're afraid. And fear is easy to disguise as care. But children can tell the difference." Her lips tightened. She didn't reply. A clerk's voice called them back inside before either could say more. The room fell silent as Judge Harlow returned to his bench. He looked out over the crowd, parents leaning forward, teachers holding their breath, children fidgeting but strangely attentive. Then he spoke. "This court has reviewed the complaint and the response. We have heard arguments from both sides and testimony from community members. The matter before us is not one of political preference, but of principle." He lifted the folder of exhibits, the children's books, and set it down with a deliberate thump. Public libraries exist for free access to ideas. To close the doors on certain stories is to close them on understanding itself. Neutrality in such matters does not mean silence. It means trust in professional judgment and trust in families to choose what is right for their children. He leaned forward, his gavel poised. "The complaint is dismissed. Story hour will continue." The first reaction was not cheers, but silence. A silence so thick it felt like the entire room was holding its breath. Then, slowly, the children began to clap. It was scattered at first, then louder, until the entire courtroom pulsed with the sound. Parents rose to their feet. Teachers embraced one another. Malik felt hands on his shoulders, brief and warm, one after another, a chain of gratitude passing through the crowd. He closed his eyes, letting the noise wash over him. For the first time in weeks, he breathed without weight pressing down. Across the aisle, Karen sat perfectly still, her folder untouched on the table. She did not look at Malik, but her son leaned close and whispered something only she could hear. For a moment, her stern mask cracked, and Malik wondered if a seed had been planted, however small. When Judge Harlow banged his gavel to adjourn, it sounded less like an ending than the start of something new. 1 week later, the library opened its doors for the largest story hour Cedar Creek had ever seen. Word had spread after the ruling, and families came early to claim a spot. The rug with moons and stars was no longer big enough. Children spilled onto the aisles, parents lined the walls, teachers sat on chairs, dragged from the study rooms. Even the mayor appeared quietly in the back, his tie loosened as if he hadn't planned to stay long but couldn't bring himself to leave. Malik stood at the front, his familiar stack of books beside him. He felt the weight of the moment, not heavy like a burden, but rich like soil ready to grow. He looked out at the crowd, at the sea of pale faces dotted with the bright eyes of children who already knew what belonging felt like, and his chest filled with something close to joy. And then he saw her. Karen Whitfield had come. Not in her navy suit, not with a folder of evidence, but in a simple blouse, her son by her side. They took seats in the very back row. She didn't raise her hand, didn't speak. She just sat, shoulders tense but present, listening. Malik opened his first book, a story about a boy who once feared asking, "Why?" The children leaned forward, drawn into the rhythm of his voice. When he paused, small hands shot up, eager to offer their own answers to the boy's questions. The room pulsed with laughter, wonder, the kind of connection only stories can summon. At the end, Tommy raised his hand again. His voice rang out clear. "Mr. Malik, can we read a book that Mrs. Whitfield chooses next time?" The room turned. Not with hostility, not with suspicion, but with something softer, an invitation. Karen's eyes widened, her son nudging her nervously. After a long silence, she nodded. Her voice was barely audible, but it carried. "Yes," she said. "I think I can find one." Malik smiled, writing the title she whispered on a slip of paper. It would go on his list for the next week. When story hour ended, the children burst into chatter. Parents shook his hand, and Emily hugged him with tears in her eyes. Outside, the winter sun had dipped low, painting the sky in rose and gold. Families spilled onto the steps, their breath rising in little clouds, their laughter drifting across the street. Malik lingered at the doorway. He looked up at the wooden sign above the entrance. "Welcome, everyone." The words had always been there, but now, after everything, they felt earned. They felt true. He closed the door behind him, carrying the stack of books like a lantern, and walked into the evening with a smile. Because sometimes a happy ending wasn't fireworks. Sometimes it was just this: a room full of children, a story shared, and the promise that next week they would gather again.